Popovich showed up and the room went silent. Gregg Popovich did not need a whistle. He did not need a clipboard. He did not even need to stand on the sideline anymore. All he had to do was walk into the room. And suddenly, every player in that San Antonio Spurs locker room understood the weight of the moment. This was not just another speech. This was not just an old coach trying to inspire a young team. This felt deeper, heavier, almost like a passing of the torch. Because when Popovich looked at Victor Wembanyama, he was not just looking at a superstar. He was looking at the future of everything he had built. The Spurs had just lived through the kind of season that can either break a young team or turn it into something dangerous. Injuries, pressure, doubt, elimination games, a brutal NBA Finals battle against the New York Knicks, and at the center of it all stood Wemby, a 7'4" phenomenon carrying expectations no 2-1 year old should have to carry. But what made this story so powerful was not only what Wembanyama did on the court, it was what Popovich did from the shadow. He showed up at airports. He appeared around practices. He boarded the team plane when the Spurs were down and shaken. He sent messages to young players when their confidence was slipping. He spoke privately with Wemby in moments the cameras never captured. And every time Pop appeared, the message was the same. You belong here. But the NBA Finals do not care about feelings. Jalen Brunson and the Knicks were cold, ruthless, and ready. New York had waited 53 years for this moment, and they were not about to let a young Spurs team steal it away. So when the final buzzer hit and the Knicks lifted the trophy, the scoreboard said San Antonio lost. But Popovich knew something different. He knew Wembanyama had just learned the lesson every great player must learn before becoming legendary. Pain comes first. Greatness comes after. Before we go deeper, subscribe to the channel if you love real NBA stories, real drama, and real emotion behind the game. And comment where you are watching from right now. Press 1 if you believe Victor Wembanyama will bring San Antonio a championship in the future. Press 2 if you think the Knicks have just started a new dynasty. The coach who never really left. Popovich stepping away from the sideline did not mean Popovich disappeared. That was the part the rest of the NBA never fully understood. They saw the Spurs with a new coach. They saw Mitch Johnson giving instructions, drawing plays, standing in front of the bench during timeouts. They saw Pop no longer barking at referees, no longer pacing with that familiar glare, no longer controlling every possession with one look. But inside San Antonio, everybody knew the truth. Pop was still there. Maybe not in the same way. Maybe not every night. Maybe not with the same physical force he had carried for decades. But his presence still moved through the building like a shadow that refused to leave. He had built too much to simply vanish. 5 championships. A culture that survived different eras. Tim Duncan, Manu Ginobili, Tony Parker, David Robinson, Kawhi Leonard. Years of sacrifice, discipline, brutal honesty, and quiet excellence. And now, just as Victor Wembanyama arrived, just as the Spurs finally had another once-in-a-generation player, Popovich's body forced him into a different role. That is what made this so painful. Pop had waited years for San Antonio's next great pillar. Then Wemby came, and for one brief moment, the old coach and the new face of the franchise shared the sideline together. Then everything changed. But Popovich did not walk away from Wemby. He adapted. He became something different. Less visible, but maybe even more powerful. He watched practices. He spoke when he needed to speak. He pulled players aside. He sent messages that were short, sharp, and impossible to ignore. And for Wembanyama, that mattered more than any public speech, because every young superstar needs someone who will not worship him, someone who will challenge him, someone who will tell him the truth when the entire world is calling him the future. Popovich was that person. He did not look at Wemby like a celebrity. He looked at him like responsibility, and that responsibility was about to become heavier than anyone expected. Wembanyama was built for greatness, but not protected from pain. Victor Wembanyama looked like the future from the moment he stepped into the NBA. There are players who are tall. There are players who are skilled. There are players who change a team. And then there is Wemby, a 7'4" force who could block a shot on one end, bring the ball up like a guard, shoot from deep, pass over defenses, and make elite scorers second-guess shots they had made their entire lives. He was not just rare, he was almost unfair. But greatness does not protect a player from pain. In some ways, it attracts more of it. Every arena wanted to see him. Every opponent wanted to test him. Every mistake became a headline. Every great game became proof that he should already be winning. The pressure around Wembanyama did not build slowly. It arrived all at once. And then came the physical cost. The blood clot scare that had already interrupted his young career. The concussion in the playoffs. The moments when he wanted to be on the floor, but the process held him back. The frustration, the anger. The feeling that his body, the same body that made him special, could also become the one thing that kept him from finishing the job. That is the part fans sometimes forget. Wemby may look like a creative player, but he still has to survive a real season, real hits, real fatigue, real fear, real disappointment. And Popovich understood that better than anyone. He had seen young stars rise too fast. He had seen talent crushed by ego, pressure, injuries, and expectations. That is why he never treated Wemby like a finished product. He treated him like a masterpiece still under construction. So when Wembanyama got emotional after seeing Pop, it was not weakness, it was recognition. He knew Pop had been through things people could not imagine. And Pop knew Wemby was walking into the hardest emotional classroom in basketball. The NBA Finals, a place where talent gets tested, but maturity gets exposed. The Spurs were not supposed to be here. Nobody expected San Antonio to grow up this fast. Young teams are supposed to lose early. They are supposed to learn quietly. They are supposed to win one playoff series, maybe scare somebody, then go home proud and talk about the future. But the Spurs skipped steps. They fought through Portland, they survived injuries, they faced Minnesota and had to deal with frustration, emotion, and Wembanyama learning in real time how thin the line is between intensity and losing control. Then came Oklahoma City, the defending champions. The team that was supposed to be more ready, more complete, more polished. The team that should have ended San Antonio's dream before the finals ever became possible. But the Spurs did not disappear. They pushed the series to the edge, they took every punch, and when Game 7 arrived, Wembanyama did not make the moment about himself. That mattered. Because young stars often chase the spotlight, Wemby was chasing something bigger. He understood that San Antonio's run was not just about highlights or statistics. It was about a culture trying to prove it was alive again. When the Spurs finally knocked off Oklahoma City, the celebration was massive. But Wembanyama's mind went somewhere else. Popovich. That told you everything. Because Pop was not the head coach anymore, but he was still the emotional center of the franchise. And Wemby knew this finals trip carried a meaning no box score could explain. For the Spurs, it was a return to relevance. For Wemby, it was his first real taste of legacy. For Popovich, it felt like watching a young generation carry the torch he had spent his life protecting. But the danger of arriving early is that the final stage does not get easier just because your story feels special. The Knicks were waiting, and New York was not interested in being part of San Antonio's fairy tale. Popovich's hidden messages changed everything. When the Spurs fell behind in the finals, Popovich made his move. Not loudly, not dramatically, not for cameras. That was never his style. The Spurs had dropped the first two games at home, and for a young team, that kind of start can poison the mind. Suddenly, every miss feels heavier. Every timeout feels tense. Every mistake feels like proof that maybe the moment is too big. That is when Pop showed up on the team plane. Think about that image. A legendary coach, recovering from serious health challenges, no longer required to lead from the bench, still walking into the most fragile moment of San Antonio's season because he knew his young team needed something only he could give. Belief? He spoke to the group, not with empty hype, not with fake motivation. Popovich never needed long speeches to make a point. He reminded them they belong. There was a reason they were there. Simple, direct, heavy. Then he stayed longer. He spoke to players individually. He sat with Wembanyama. Whatever he said in that private moment never became public, and that is what made it more powerful. Some words are not meant for the internet. Some words are meant for one player, in one seat, at one moment, when his whole future is balancing between doubt and destiny. And Wemby listened. The Spurs went into Madison Square Garden and punched back. Wembanyama dominated. Stephon Castle delivered. San Antonio cut into the series and reminded the Knicks this would not be a coronation. But Pop's influence was not only for Wemby. He texted Dylan Harper after a rough game. The message was cold, clear, and pure Popovich. Find a way to get the job done. No excuses, no comfort, just responsibility. That is why Popovich still mattered. He was not coaching the game anyway. He was coaching the soul of the team. The Knicks were colder than the moment. The problem for San Antonio was simple. The New York Knicks were not scared. They had waited too long for this. 53 years of heartbreak, disappointment, false hope, and Madison Square Garden, dreams that kept collapsing before June. This team was different. Jalen Brunson was different. He did not play like a man chasing attention. He played like a man built for pressure. Calm face, strong handle, no wasted emotion. Every time San Antonio thought the game was slipping away from New York, Brunson pulled it back with one possession. The Spurs had length. They had youth. They had Wemby erasing shots at the rim, but the Knicks had patience. That was the difference. They could trail early and not panic. They could miss shots and not fracture. They could watch San Antonio build a lead, absorb the noise, then slowly cut into it until the young Spurs started feeling the walls close in. That is veteran basketball. And in the finals, that kind of calm can be deadly. Karl Anthony Towns struggled at times against Wembanyama's defense. New York had ugly stretches. There were quarters where the Knicks looked uncomfortable, even overwhelmed, but they never looked broken, and that is what separated them from San Antonio. The Spurs were still learning how to win a finals game. The Knicks were learning how to finish a championship. Every comeback made New York more dangerous. Every close fourth quarter made Brunson more confident. Every Spurs mistake became fuel. By Game 4, the Knicks delivered the kind of comeback that can scar a young team. San Antonio had control. They had energy. They had the building believing again. Then it disappeared. A massive lead vanished. The Knicks stormed back. And suddenly, San Antonio was not just down in the series. They were staring at the emotional damage of knowing they had been close enough to touch victory, then watched it get ripped away. That is when Game 5 became more than basketball. It became a test of survival. Game 5 became Wemby's first great heartbreak. Game 5 started exactly the way San Antonio needed. The crowd was alive. The Spurs were flying. Wembanyama was everywhere. Every Knicks drive seemed to meet his wingspan. Every shot near the rim felt dangerous. New York struggled early, and for a moment, Frost Bank Center believed the series might be going back to Madison Square Garden. That is the cruel part about heartbreak. It often starts with hope. San Antonio built the lead. Wemby protected the paint. Dylan Harper gave the Spurs energy. The young core played like a team, refusing to let its season die quiet. But the Knicks did not rush. They waited. Little by little, New York tightened the game. The open shots started falling. The defense got sharper. The Spurs, once comfortable, started feeling the same pressure they had felt all series. And then Jalen Brunson took over. Not with loud celebrations, not with wild emotion, with control. Bucket after bucket. Possession after possession. The Spurs needed one stop, and Brunson kept finding one more answer. By the fourth quarter, the building could feel it. San Antonio was still fighting, but New York had the calm of a team that had already survived this movie before. Brunson tied the game. Then he kept going. 13 straight points in the fourth quarter, 45 on the night. That is not just scoring. That is execution under the brightest lights in basketball. Wembanyama battled. He did not quit. He did not hide. He carried the weight as long as he could. But sometimes, the first finals run does not end with a parade. Sometimes, it ends with a young superstar sitting in silence, realizing that talent can take you to the edge, but experience teaches you how to finish. The Knicks won 94-90. New York was champion again, and Victor Wembanyama had just met the most painful teacher in the NBA. Failure. New York got the trophy, but San Antonio got the warning. When the final buzzer sounded, New York finally exploded. The Knicks were champions for the first time since 1973. The long drought was over. The pain, the jokes, the decades of disappointment, the nights when Madison Square Garden felt more like a museum of broken dreams than the home of a proud franchise, all of it came pouring out at once. Jalen Brunson had delivered the performance New York had been waiting for. 45 points, 13 straight in the fourth quarter. Every time San Antonio reached for one last breath, Brunson took it away with another cold-blooded bucket. That was not luck. That was a superstar closing the door. The Knicks had their hero. They had their trophy. They had the kind of night a city remembers forever. But on the other side of the building, behind the closed doors of the Spurs locker room, there was a completely different kind of history happening. No confetti, no celebration, no champagne, no cameras chasing smiles, only silence. And in that silence sat Victor Wembanyama, carrying the full weight of a season that had moved too fast, hurt too much, and ended one step before the dream could breathe again. He had done almost everything a young franchise player could do. He had protected the rim, he had battled through pain, he had absorbed pressure that would crush most players, he had pulled San Antonio from a rebuilding team into the NBA Finals before the league was ready for it. But he had not won, and that is the part that mattered. Because in the NBA, greatness is not only revealed when a player dominates, sometimes it is revealed in the way he sits with defeat. No excuses, no hiding, no blaming the whistle, the schedule, the youth of the roster, or the weight of the moment. Just truth. Wembanyama understood that New York had been better when it mattered most. Brunson had been calmer. The Knicks had been sharper in the final minutes. San Antonio had the future, but New York had the present. That is a painful thing for a young star to accept, but it is also necessary. When Wemby called the loss the biggest learning moment of his life, it sounded bigger than a post-game quote. It sounded like a player who had just been forced to grow up in public. It sounded like Popovich's voice had found a permanent place inside him, because Pop never built champions by feeding them excuses. He built them by forcing them to look directly at the lesson. The lesson was clear. The finals do not reward potential. They reward execution. The finals do not care how young you are, how talented you are, or how beautiful your story feels. The finals ask one brutal question. Can you finish? This time, San Antonio could not. But that does not mean the Spurs left with nothing. They left with scars. And scars matter. They left with the memory of New York celebrating. They left with the feeling of a lead slipping away. They left with the image of Brunson walking into the fourth quarter like he owned the moment. They left with the sound of silence in their own locker room. Those are the things that can haunt a team. But if the team is built right, they can also harden. That is why this loss did not feel like a normal ending. It felt like a warning sent quietly to the rest of the NBA. San Antonio now knows what the finals demand. Wembanyama now knows what championship pressure feels like when every possession has a consequence. The young Spurs now understand that being talented enough to arrive is not the same as being mature enough to finish. And somewhere nearby, Popovich understood it better than anyone. He had seen this before. Young teams do not become dynasties because everything goes perfectly. They become dynasties because the first heartbreak teaches them what regular season success never could. The Knicks got the ring. Brunson got the MVP, New York got the parade, but San Antonio got something the scoreboard could not measure. A 21-year-old giant who has already stood on the biggest stage felt the deepest basketball pain of his life and did not run from it. That is dangerous, because next time, Wembanyama will not be guessing what the finals feel like. He will remember, and that memory may become the fuel that changes everything. The lesson that could create a dynasty. The most dangerous version of Victor Wembanyama is not the one blocking shots into the third row. It is not the one pulling up from three like a guard. It is not the one grabbing rebounds over entire front courts or turning fast breaks into something that looks impossible for a man his size. The most dangerous version of Wemby is the one who remembers how this loss felt. That is the version the NBA should fear, because talent made him special. Pain may make him complete. Every great player has a moment that follows him. A moment he does not talk about much but never forgets. A possession, a missed opportunity, a celebration happening on the other side, a locker room so quiet that the silence becomes louder than the crowd. For Wembanyama, this finals loss could become that moment. He will remember Game 5. He will remember San Antonio leading. He will remember the building believing. He will remember the way New York refused to panic. He will remember Jalen Brunson walking into the fourth quarter and turning pressure into something that looked effortless. Most of all, he will remember that being close was not enough. That is the lesson every future champion has to learn. The NBA is full of gifted players who can dominate in February. It is full of stars who can produce numbers, create highlights, and carry teams through the regular season. But June is different. June exposes everything. It exposes conditioning. It exposes decision-making. It exposes emotional control. It exposes whether a team trusts its system when the first option is taken away. It exposes whether a young star can stay patient when the defense loads up, the crowd gets tight, and every mistake feels permanent. Wembanyama got that education early. That is why this loss could become so important for San Antonio. The Spurs do not need to panic. They do not need to tear down the roster. They do not need to chase every loud name on the market just because the finals ended in pain. They need to build correctly around the truth they just discovered. Wemby is already good enough to take them to the biggest stage. Now they must build the kind of team that can help him finish there. That means more late game creators, more reliable shooting, more physical depth, more players who can survive when the game slows down and every possession becomes a fight. It means protecting Wembanyama's body without limiting his greatness. It means giving him enough help so he does not have to be the defense, the offense, the emotional engine, and the safety net all at once. Most importantly, it means patience. That is where Popovich's fingerprints still matter. Popovich knows championships are not microwaved. They are built slowly, painfully, sometimes invisibly. They are built in practices nobody watches, film sessions nobody posts, honest conversations nobody leaks, and losses that feel unbearable in the moment but become priceless years later. This is what he gave Wembanyama. Not a shortcut, a standard. Pop's message has always been bigger than basketball. Do the work, respect the game, hold yourself accountable. Do not mistake hype for achievement. Do not let praise make you soft. Do not let pain make you bitter. That is the difference between a star and a franchise pillar. Wembanyama is learning that now. He has already seen the mountain. He has already felt how thin the air gets near the top. He has already discovered that the finals are not a place for potential alone. The next step is becoming the kind of player who can bend those moments instead of being shaped by them. And that should terrify the league, because Wemby is only 21. He has already survived injuries. He has already played through pressure. He has already carried San Antonio into a championship series. He has already watched another team lift the trophy in front of him, that is not the end of his story. That is the beginning of his obsession. The Knicks may have won the championship, but they may have also awakened something in San Antonio that will not go away. A young superstar with final scars, a franchise with championship DNA, an old coach still guiding from the shadows, and a future that suddenly feels closer than the rest of the NBA wants to admit. Popovich, final gift to Wembanyama. The real story was never only about who won the trophy. Yes, the Knicks earned it. Jalen Brunson was brilliant. New York deserved its moment after waiting more than 5 decades to stand on top of the NBA again. But San Antonio's story was quieter, and maybe, in the long run, just as powerful, because Gregg Popovich gave Victor Wembanyama something no stat sheet can measure. He gave him perspective, not comfort, not excuses, not protection from criticism, perspective. Pop showed Wemby that greatness is not just about talent. It is about how you respond when the game breaks your heart. It is about how you handle pressure without losing yourself. It is about respecting the opponent, learning from defeat, and coming back with more wisdom instead of more noise. That is the human lesson inside this basketball story. Winning matters. Every player wants the ring. Every city wants the parade. Every franchise wants the banner. But the best champions are not created by victory alone. They are shaped by the losses that force them to grow. Wembanyama now knows what the finals feel like. He knows how cruel the fourth quarter can be. He knows what it means when a great opponent refuses to panic. And he knows that the next time he reaches this stage, talent alone will not be enough. He will need patience. He will need trust. He will need the pain of this season to become disciplined. And somewhere in San Antonio, Popovich knows it too. He may not be on the sideline the same way anymore, but his fingerprints are still on this franchise. In the locker room, on the practice floor, in the private conversations, in the way Wemby speaks after losing. The Knicks won the championship, but Popovich may have just helped build the next great Spurs chapter. If you believe Victor Wembanyama will bring San Antonio a championship in the future, like this video, share it with another NBA fan, and subscribe to the channel for more real NBA stories. And now, comment below. Press 1 if you believe Wemby's first championship is coming. Press 2 if you think the Knicks are ready to rule the NBA for years.